Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, but this is a Wildcat 223. If you're not familiar with the Wildcat 223, well, this is a factory stroked 212. We'll go over some of its finer points as we go. This one already has a few modifications, but this time we're going to attempt a head swap with some parts from my friends at Grey Goat Garage and OMB Warehouse.com. This engine is going to be going back on the Trailmaster. We're no longer using the stock tank, so I'm going to remove that as well as these two brackets. These were for the torque converter guard. We're not using that either. With those things out of the way, I took a moment and I just went around with the rag and cleaned up the area that I'm going to be working in. I'm going to take off the fan shroud, continue cleaning a little bit, and then we'll be up here. This actually isn't looking too bad. Now, I'm going to remove the valve cover. Just place this to the side for now. Once I get the head off, I'll just thread the little 8mm bolts in a little bit so that everything stays together. That said, 4 bolts. I think I can get these ones without pulling the rockers. 4 head bolts and a spark plug. Now I can remove the head. I'm going to need 2 hands for this. I get the head and the old gasket. I'm going to be throwing that out. I'm going to grab the shop vac and I'm really going to clean. I haven't dumped the oil out of this yet, so I'm going to try not to suck any back up through. Now that I basically have a clean slate, we can talk a little bit about this head swap. We're going from the Wildcat Hemi to a non-hemi. The new one that we're using is over here in the box. It's very similar to this one. This is a 14cc small valve for a 196. These are GX200 dowels. This minged up one, that goes to a Wildcat. Next to each other, you can see that one is a little bit longer. So, we're going to be using those instead. With the dowels set all the way in, you can see the difference. Before this one was bent, it was just stuck into the block. This one wasn't in the picture. I tried to put on the 196 head and it seemed to give me a little bit of flack. So, got that one out of there. The other one is stuck in the Wildcat head because I used Loctite last time and yada yada yada. Long and the short, we kind of knew this was going to happen. So we're going to be running brand new clone ones, and that fixes that issue completely. Another difference to take note of is the head bolts themselves. The Wildcat comes with 2 short bolts and 2 long bolts. GX200 clones come with 4 of the long bolts. When you look at the 2 heads from the side, you can see why. One of them is a little healthier than the cyborg meat department. So, to do this swap, you're going to want some GX200 non-hemi bolts or something better. The stock Wildcat Hemi head has a 27mm intake and a 25 on the exhaust. The GX200 head that we're using today is a 14cc with a 32 on the intake and a 25 on the exhaust. Side by side, you can really see the differences. The stock Hemi head has a much larger chamber than the 14cc head. This head has a larger intake valve. That means that this head is not only going to build compression, but it's going to allow more air and more fuel. That means we're going to have a tighter mix. That's going to give us a boost in power, torque, and RPM. But we can do even better. This head has a 3-way valve job already done. That means all of the transitions are blended. Everything has been vacuum tested, ready to go. What hasn't been done is the porting. So, I'm going to attempt to open up the short radius, which is right here on the exhaust side, and over here on the intake. I'm also going to smooth this transition here and in front of the valve guides. I'll do that on both sides. I do my porting about as grassroots as you can. I have a Dremel, I have a micro burr on there, I have a few other burrs over here, a pair of gloves, a pair of goggles, and a comfortable seat outside. This tape gives us a little bit of protection on this beautiful valve job that was done, but it also gives me contrast. When you're just chopping away with the Dremel and you're constantly staring at one color, say the silver for the aluminum, you can kind of get lost, and I find that that's when you get lackadaisical and you make mistakes. That's when you nip your bowls. So I'm going to try it this way, and hopefully it makes a difference. Otherwise, it's just tape. I'll peel it off. Alright, let's take a look And see how I did. These are the bits that I used. This micro burr did about 90%. 2% with that bad boy. And just a little finish work with a sanding drum. Let's inspect the exhaust valve first. The tape worked really well. I didn't nip the edges of my bowl up here where the transition is, and I definitely didn't mar up either one of my seats. Right here is where I came in and took off as much cyborg meat as I could to open up the short radius. I'm also smoothing the transition so that when the exhaust goes out, it flows the best that it can. From the top, we look down in, and you can see that I rounded out this part of the bowl where it meets the runner. Did that on both sides. Also came up and worked out the little bit of extra that's on the edge of the bowl itself. Looking in from the exhaust port, this is the short radius. We open that up. I opened up this transition from the runner to the bowl, and then removed some material in front of my guide. I then blended everything together. After that, I went through, rounded out the top corners, and then ran the sanding drum around. After the sanding drum, I went through about 5 stages of the sandpapes. The intake being 32 millimeter made this job a little bit easier. It's still risky though, so you got to be careful. We opened up that short radius. I spent a little more time on opening up the transition into the bowls. We took off a little bit more meat in front of the guide, and then worked and blended down to the runners. Here we are, port side, and you can see, even though I blended everything and opened it up ever so slightly, I didn't sand it smooth. I actually went side to side really fast with my burr like that all around, and then just went over it one pass with the sanding drum. That way there are a multitude of little ridges and bumps. We're going to have plenty of flow. What we're hoping happens here is improved atomization. We're running an EC manifold, which is really short, and we don't have that extended chamber for things to happen before they go in. Hopefully, this will help. This straight edge on the intake port is where I used that other burr. You can see how it's kicked back just a little bit, where the rest of it isn't. That was to match the port on the intake manifold. When these line up, everything is nice and smooth and seamless, allowing our runner on the intake to do its best job. Since we're going to be turning up the compression a little bit, I'm going to take the time to drill out my galley hole. We're going to be dropping the oil anyway, so this is the perfect time to do it. Get the oil out, get that cover off, we'll see what's inside. This Wildcat has a Bonsai 265 race cam and a Pinnacle long rod. I'm removing the cam and the lifters. You may have noticed this clearancing that I did on my crank lobe. It's not as serious as you think. It's almost just a polishing to remove the mill scale. I was ever so slightly catching on the back of my decompression, so I also did a little work right there. That's all me, so I know we're not touching anymore. Galley hole is right here, that little guy in the middle. We want to protect our bearing. I'm not pulling the crank, so if anything falls down here, that's okay. We can clean it up. This is important up here, so I'm going to wrap towels, something around here best I can, and then we're going to be drilling it from the top. It looks like 2 will do. Now I'm going to have to pick out the right drill bit. This one is going to have to be a regular Stretch Armstrong. We're not going to be able to get the drill chuck in there, so let me see what I got. Very carefully, I used a 3/16. Now I'm going to grab my shop vac and clean up the debris. I vacuumed it out the best I can. Went through with some carbon choke cleaner right down the hatch, a little bit along the bottom. I'm staying away from my bearing, getting my vacuum and such around there, but not with this junk. Now I'm going to grab the air chuck. I'm going to give it a hard blow, clean it out one more time with the spray, vacuum, and then we're going to start lubricating and reassembling the bottom end. Clean as can be. I'm starting my reassembly by quenching my cylinder. I just dumped a little bit of fresh oil down on the bottom on top of the piston. I'll work it around the cylinder, grab the flywheel, I'll work it up, and then I'll grab the oil with the rag. After a couple times and the rag looking clean, I'm going to tilt this thing up on its side a little bit, kind of at an angle, and we're going to be installing the lifters. Just to make sure, I compared these lifters to a stock GX200 196 clone lifter. They're the same. That might be important when it comes to push rods. With my handy dandy cap of oil on the side, I'm lubing them up good, and I'm placing them in their respective holes. I have my cam all cleaned off, ready to install. You can see all this fresh excess oil just dripping from everywhere. It's because I took a funnel and I poured oil over the crank bearing, the rod bearing, and into the cam journal. I know that that's there. I'll probably pour this out and then add it to whatever I fill the engine with once we have it sealed back up. Now that the cam is in and the timing dots are lined up, I'm going to grab my funnel and I'm going to pour oil over the cam. Clean cover, fresh gasket, oil on the bearing. I'm adding a crank shim this time around. I'm placing just a scant amount of red Loctite on the last few threads of these cover bolts before I install them. We did this before. It wasn't an issue, so we're going to do it again. Wildcat cares about torque, and so do we. It gives us the sequence on the side of the cover for tightening the bolts. I set them at 17 foot-pounds and then 18. Before we put any oil in our bottom end, we're going to finish installing the top end. The pinnacle rod in this block brings the piston pretty close to the top of the deck. To play it safe, we're going to be using a stock Tillotson 212R head gasket. This one is 0.045. To help harness all this new compression, we're going to be using the Mondo stud kit from my friends at OMBWarehouse.com. This kit comes with 4 black oxide studs and some big old nuts. Just putting a little doink of oil on my threads. There's probably some red Loctite down in there still. It's not getting inside the block, so I'm not overly concerned. These studs, you just hand tighten. Now that it's starting to look like the Savin 196 foundation, and I'm in familiar territory, I know exactly what to do. We need to install the valves. Clean this head out one more time. The lapping and everything was already done. I was careful not to touch those seats, so I'm going to lube up those stems, set the valves in, and we'll get the springs and the retainers. This high compression head utilizes the 5.5 stems. I just added a new intake seal and threw one on the exhaust side that I had kicking around off of 196 or something. Still in good shape. For the retainers, we're going to turn to a stainless steel valve kit. Inside is just what we need. Here's what we're after: retainers and the high performance lash caps. I'm going to be using 22-pound springs. The valves are in. The lash caps are in a safe place. Make sure the gasket is on the studs, and then the head goes on. At this point, we can hand tighten those Mondo nuts. Once they're all hand tight, we're going to torque them down to 20 foot-pounds. For valve stability, we're going to turn to a set of Champion rockers. These rockers are super easy to install. Just lube up the threads and then hand tighten them. And I take the nut, put that on, and then I use a 10mm socket on the end of an extension, kind of like a screwdriver. It makes it easier. And all you have to do is seat them, just like that. These are stainless steel GX200 push rods. We're going to install those now. High performance lash caps go on. Now we can slide our rockers into place. The two nuts on the top of the rockers get set at 94 inch-pounds. After bringing everything up to top dead center so that I could begin to lash my valves, I noticed something was a little off with my rocker geometry. I made a post and we got a pretty resounding answer across the boards. The GX200 pushrod length is too short. That's what's in the exhaust side here. Notice the intake side sits a little more level. That's going to translate from the push rod through the rocker and up to where we make contact at the lash cap. This is a lot less extreme and exactly what we're looking for. This is the GX200 stainless steel push rod. That is currently installed on our exhaust side. You can see how much better the intake is. I had a set of 5.540s from another build sitting around. I tried those and they were too long. Our rocker was sitting kind of like that. NATO over on the GX200 Predator 212 clone modifiers group suggested the NR Racing 5340. I hit them up and they came through about 2 days. I'm now going to install the other 5340 over here on the exhaust side. These rockers have quite substantial hardware for the adjusters. A guy with sausage fingers can really appreciate that. It made lashing out a whole lot easier. Keeping in mind, I already had a little bit of the liquid gold on the bottom of the block. I added just under 20 ounces of fresh motor oil. To ensure our rocker to valve cover clearance, we're going to be using this OMB Warehouse billet extension. With my engine propped up, I just use my funnel to drip a little bit of oil with my rockers, valve stems, retainers. Push rods probably get some too. It's not a lot, just a few drops. At this point, I know what I got, bro. This head swap also requires the valve cover itself. I kifed this one off a 212R. Oh, I know. A 212R. For the love of mini bikes. I like to put everything together like a sandwich, including my hardware. Those go through, and it holds everything in place, and then we can just align with the holes and start finger tightening the bolts. That's always the plan. We'll see how it goes. The other reason I like these OMB extensions is that they give you the option. We can add a plug or a barb. So in the future, if we want to add some sort of venting because we have too much compression and maybe we're blowing out seals somewhere, well, that's going to be part of our solution. For now, though, we're going to go with the old plug. I'm going to be upgrading to a different coil wire and spark plug boot. I just threw one of these flashy filters on right now for my valve cover vent. At this point, I'm not going to install the entire carburetor, but I would like to at least get my short billet manifold on there. We just have a few more things to do, but we'll have this Wildcat back in its natural habitat before you know it. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.